Okay, I'll try again. Host allows you to record the meeting. Yes, it does.
Okay. And I'm going to try to record it on audio here. Well, I know it's already recording, so I can't record it.
Right.
So maybe that'll be it. So here we
Yep.
go. And let me remind everyone, if there's noise in your neck of the woods or apartment, please put yourself on mute so we have a good recording without swear words and things like that.
Well, what's a good recording without swear
Right.
words?
Okay.
Well, I do want to show this to my students, so but they don't have a problem with swear words either. So
And here's Dave Ransom. He just came on. He's our illustrious treasurer. And
Hi,
Carl
Dave.
Way is our acting vice president. I think we should just go ahead. I think unless other folks from the far reaches who aren't really attending members most often way on, someone may come in, but we'll
Okay.
do that as they come in. So Marty, do you have anything to say before Camillo maybe says a few?
No, it's not quite sure how our best way to go ahead with it. Maybe if one of the poems jumped out particularly to somebody to discuss, or one question, general question that came up from the reading, we could start either in those places.
This book is the was it the third?
Third.
Yeah, the third in a series of books that I written on basically my, not so much my personal experience, well, some of that, but I'm also a philosopher. I teach philosophy in college, and my focus in philosophy is in ethics and social and political. And if you have Googled my name, you see that the vast majority of things that I write have to do with war, morality, moral injury, that sort of thing. So I kind of put both of my worlds together. And hi, Jeffrey.
Hey.
And sometimes it gets confusing, which I'm supposed to be doing. I was not long ago asked to speak at the what was it? The Truth Commission on Conscience in War at the Riverside Church in Manhattan, which was kind of an honor to do, being that I spoke from the very pulpit where Dr. King gave his Beyond Vietnam speech. So that in itself was kind of an honor. But there was a number of people speaking there, way more knowledgeable than I, but it was an interesting experience. And part of the issue that I had was I wasn't really sure who I was supposed to be at this meeting. Was I speaking as a veteran of the Vietnam War, the American War in Vietnam, or was I speaking as a philosopher who studies war theoretically? So I didn't really, kind of had a difficult time figuring it out, but I ended up speaking from both. I'm kind of schizophrenic in that way. I can hit it from both angles. It's I have an advantage, I think, in that when I write about war, I can just shift personalities and do my research by introspecting. I look at myself and my experiences and how I feel about things, and I can translate that when I shift back to the other personality. I can write about it philosophically. So that's kind of the origin of this book. This series of book. The book I'm working on now is a new series, and it's going to be more theoretical ethics as it applies to war. So it's going to be, I think, less interesting, but something I needed to do as a philosopher to hit it from a more theoretical angle as well. So that's that I've been trying to get out for the last year. And hopefully it'll be out by the summer. But this book wasn't I didn't intend it to be part of the series, but I had all this stuff that I wrote over the years, and actually someone told me, well, why don't you put it all together? publish it as a chapbook, which, it's kind of a small poetry book. And I did originally, but then it was so much that I said, well, why don't I just make it part of the series, which I did.
So before you go on, Camillo, Jeffrey has joined us. Jeffrey, thanks for weighing in and coming in. Just reminding people, if there's noise in your area, to mute, because we are recording this for Camillo, or Camillo is recording it for his students. So go ahead. I have some questions, and I'm sure other people do. But if you had more to say before we start, Camillo, go ahead, and then we can get into questions or comments from.
Well, I just wanted to set it up a little bit. I mean, I have, unless you have a specific area you want me to talk about, or a poem you want to consider, or the prose that you want me to consider, otherwise I can just, wing it from your questions, and we'll do it that way. Maybe that'll be best.
Well, I think your introduction was perfect, because one of the poems that really jumped out to me was War Crazy. You were talking about being a little bit schizophrenic in your profession and combining it in with your experience. And that poem just, it reminded me so much of my time of deciding, what am I doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Just as I was making the transition. So it really spoke to me. And there was one part, it's, let's see, it's on page 60, I believe. I should put my glasses on so I know for sure what that number is. Yeah, page 60, and it's in the middle of that long stanza where you talk about, but being crazy has liberated me, allowing me to see that war is not a deficiency at all, but an excess of greed, ambition, intolerance, and lust for power. And one thing that's been coming up a lot for me in my own thinking is how much of, I see that as completely true, but also in our society as a whole, it goes, it rang up something from when I was a kid of the 7 deadly sins, and there's a bunch of them right there.
and deadly enough to get a lot of people killed, unfortunately.
Right.
I mean, this was the result of my experience, and similar to yours, that I just needed to introspect, to look inside and see if I can figure this stuff out. People, I'm sure you've heard it as well. Why don't you just go on? I've lost friends, Facebook acquaintances. I know one particular woman who I went to grammar school with, who found me on Facebook and befriended me, and then the way she started off was that I didn't even think you were alive. I thought you got killed in Vietnam. So I said, no, I managed to survive that. Now the issue is to survive the aftermath. And I put a lot of my Facebook is not for whatever the social baloney. It's for me to put observations and political stuff, and use it for networking, which I think is a good tool for that. So she finally came back and told me that, why are you so stuck in Vietnam? Why don't you, it's been 50 years ago, probably. Yeah, it has been 50 years now. Why don't you just let it go and go on with your life? I'm sure you all heard that. And it's as though we never tried, of course we tried. And that's what it's all about, is trying to put that behind us, and go on with our lives and find some place. And the fact that we're old and gray means that we've managed to find something. We managed to, I don't know, get peace, but we found a place for that experience in our being and who we are. And as a result, we were able to live with it. And unfortunately, so many others weren't so fortunate as we. War, and as you well know, and I tried to make clear to her, although she eventually, told me that I deserve whatever I get, basically, because she didn't like my politics or anything like that either. So she, what do they call it, defriended me or something, and blocked me. So she banished me to the desert of Facebook. It's just that, as you know, war is something that stays with us and just doesn't go away. I mean, I remember when I used to coordinate a veterans self-help group at the local Veterans Administration, and when they had nothing back in the day, and we kind of, the veterans got together and started it ourselves, and we used to run our own groups like VVAW did as well. And I mean, I remember a group in which, and it wasn't only just us, there were Korean War vets, and it was a while ago, so even World War II vets in there. And it always it wasn't amazing to me or to you probably, but I mean, when these individuals, and their war was like 70 years gone maybe at the time, and they would talk about experiences that happened to them like it was yesterday. One gentleman was on the Bataan Death March, and I mean, he just managed. He said it's one of the first times that he actually talked about it in that group, and I really felt like that was a great moment that he was able to face that demon or those demons and talk about it. So, and of course he cried through the whole experience, and again, like it was yesterday. So people who haven't been there, don't understand the experience, don't really appreciate the gravity of what war does and how it impacts on those of us who had the unfortunate experience. But
I have another question about this same poem, if you're willing to talk about it.
sure.
On page 57, you say, sometimes things work out for the best, though as my unorthodoxy, my being crazy probably saved my life. And I don't know what that experience was and how it saved your life, but it might be instructive. But if it's something that's hard to talk about, of course, you don't need to.
No, I mean, look, it takes time for us to be able to go to those places. I mean, we've spent so many years trying to pretend as though they don't exist. We try to live in the illusion and the mythology of what they tell us. I mean, we like the hero thing. I mean, it certainly rather prefer being called a hero than recognize ourselves as murderers and dupes that we would dupe by the government to go. So we try to cling to that. We try to find refuge under the umbrella of nobility, of the warrior heroism and that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, that's a facade and that's an illusion, and you don't heal from illusions and you don't heal from mythology in order to begin to, and I'm not even sure that healing is possible, especially after the experience has become so static after all these years. But you have to face the demons head on, and that's not always easy to do. So I probably was as guilty as the next person for trying not to face it. And then the whole notion of being crazy was a way for me to escape, the way for me not to live in the illusion, to live in the pretend and not to confront what was truly going on. I mean, I used to spend my summers up in the Adirondacks, humping around. I used to have a big old Great Dane, and I used to put a pack on his back, and I used to have a pack on mine. We used to hump around the boonies from about the thaw. I was at about the end of March, April, till about the first snow in November, and then come back to Brooklyn, where I used to live in the basement of my parents' home. I had one room down there. I eventually bought an old abandoned hunter's cabin that I happened upon humping around. And I actually bought it for about $800 at the time that I managed to come up with. And I still have it today, although it's with the kids and the grandkids now. I even added a flush bathroom, so we still go up there and spend summers and other times when they need to get away. Memorial Day is one of my hideaway days. But eventually, you have to face the reality of it. You can't live in the illusion. You can't live in the facade of the myth or of insanity. And maybe at the point when I was living in that facade, in that mythology, I needed it. I needed it because I wasn't ready to confront the demons. So maybe it saved my life. It allowed me time to evolve, if you will, to the point where I could sit down in the company of others. I always found that group like this is the most, and I advise it to the young vets today, but they seem not to be so happy about groups. They seem to have other things that work for them. But for me, it was always sitting down with other vets, people who have been there, who know the experience, who have your back, and to go those places together. And I think that's the kind of the origin of that thing.
Thanks for that. That's helpful. Thank you very much.
No problem. I liked War Crazy. It was it's kind of an older piece, but it really allowed me to confront a lot of the anger, frustration, and disappointment. And I know anger is not long ago, maybe a few years now, I met Claude Anshin Thomas. I don't know if you know Claude. You may have. He's done something at a number of VFP conventions. He's a Buddhist, a Zen Buddhist monk, and he a Vietnam combat veteran, and he runs a Buddhist temple in Florida, Zalto, Zaltho, and he has, we have. He found me through my work. Someone actually gave him a copy of not this book, but one of the other ones. And he contacted me, and I got up what he was doing. He does veteran retreats, and really well done. And he's an interesting guy to talk to. Matter of fact, if you're interested in that kind of group environment, he holds a group chat every Sunday, 7 p.m. And he invites all veterans and family members to come and join this kind of arena to discuss what he does. But he has a very interesting way of trying to advocate living happily with his unhappiness, is something kind of how he says it. Living pleasantly with his unpleasantness. He got this kind of, he's got all these nice little Zen sayings and quotations, which I think are interesting and worth looking at. So it's, for me, anger, I think, was I have a moth flying around. Where the hell do moths come from at this time of year?
Florida.
From Florida. Yeah, he landed on my coffee cup, I think. Hope he didn't land in my coffee cup. No.
Maybe Texas.
There
Oh,
are
God.
winter moths here. You can see them flying even in sub-zero weather in the fall.
Really?
Out in the woods. Yes, up here in Vermont.
Oh, well, I'm in Long Island, and today was about 30 or so. I think the middle of the week is supposed to warm up to 40, so look forward to that. Maybe some of the snow will melt. Yeah.
One thing I've noticed in the other veteran group that I do is the real difficulty, or the thing that a lot of them hang on to, the hardest transition is to accept the fact that their combat experience did not have meaning. They need to have it mean something. And so in a lot of your poems, it's coming to the conclusion that, you're exploited, essentially. And that seems to be a really tough transition for a lot of people.
Yeah. And it's gotten me a lot of death threats as well from veterans. Probably that poem that you mentioned, don't thank me for my service was probably the most commented article on Truth Out. And I actually wrote a follow-up to it because I felt the need to answer some of the comments and a lot of criticism. I was probably, you know, and probably more people saying, yeah, I understand that. I can sympathize with that. And but there was the other side, of course, that, you know, called me a traitor and you probably weren't even there, and, you know, all the, you know, the typical kinds of thing. But yeah, I mean, as I said before, it's certainly preferable to think ourselves a hero and don't blow that, you know what I mean? Because if you blow that, or if you show that's just a myth, then what's left? Did Joe and Jerry die for nothing? Did I sacrifice, risk my life and sacrifice so many years dealing with this for nothing? Was I a dupe? No, I don't want to face that. I like the hero thing. At least I can take some solace in that. So if you confront me with the possibility, or with me having to think about it, that maybe it wasn't as glorious and as worthwhile and as necessary as I like to think it was, or at least that makes it meaningful and worthwhile to me, or to people, other people, family members who lost children, and then, you know, you're doing damage. But again, I don't think that's damage, because again, you don't heal. I mean, veterans don't heal from living in the illusion and the myth. Neither do family members. So I think we all need to garner the courage and the moral fortitude to call it for what it is, call ourselves for what we are, you know, to recognize that we were not doing great things, and we were doing some pretty awful things, and it's difficult to live with. I remember a number of years ago, Susan Schnall, you guys know Susan Schnall? She is the head of New York City Veterans of Peace, and she's also featured in what's the name of that movie about BVAW? Can you remember offhand that film about BVAW? Dave Klein was in it, in that crew. Well, anyway, she was in the Navy at the time. She was a nurse. I think she was a what do they call captains in the Navy? Lieutenants. She was a lieutenant, and she was, and she had a friend who, with her, decided that they were going to take a plane, a small plane, and load it with pamphlets, and go up in the air and drop these pamphlets over an aircraft carrier this is on the West Coast, that was parked and on the West San Diego, I think, and over a base. And she did all that, and she was eventually court-martialed. But being that she was a woman, for some reason they kind of leashed on her, but she was able to get away, not with a dishonorable discharge. But anyway, she now teaches at NYU, New York University, here in Manhattan, and she had a friend who had a friend, and was the what do they call themselves now, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, or something to that extent, was the UN ambassador, and she was having him speak at her class, and she asked me to speak as well. So it was a very interesting night, you can imagine. And I speak at these things all the time, so I don't really get nervous about these things. But for some reason, that night I got nervous, because I don't think I was ever speaking on the same platform with someone who had been my enemy. And now I had to look at it and see the face of my enemy, and see what reflection do I have. And it was I have an article out, you can Google it, Talking with the Enemy, I think the name of the article is, where it was just another important experience in my evolution, where he was so he spoke about reconciliation, not only reconciliation with American soldiers, but also reconciliation among themselves with Vietnamese who fought for the South. I mean, there was certainly some trauma there, but they managed to go on. And I don't know if any of you went back to Vietnam, but everyone, I didn't have the nerve to do it myself, but I have a really good friend who did. And I mean, he thought it was a great cathartic experience. I mean, he was really a heavy combat guy, platoon commander, Marine, and he went back to the places where he was involved and met with people who had been there on the other side. And he was amazed how he found himself, that they found them hugging each other. So I can imagine that being a cathartic and a very healing experience. Yeah, I just didn't have the nerve to go. Can't see being there without an M16. I hate to say it, but
Bud, you had your hand up? Question?
I see we have a new. Hi, Gordon.
Gordon,
Hey, Gordon.
No, I was just, I've got to run out of electricity and things not working, so I'm going to try. Might have to switch to another device. And I have sort of a philosophical question,
Oh, good.
or maybe it's not philosophical, but
Is it a question?
you know,
That's good.
well, I could preface it, but the question is, you know, a lot of us have been speaking against war and acting against war. I mean, I came back from Vietnam in '66, and wasn't long thereafter where I got my head turned around. But here we are, 50 years later, and maybe we're not having soldiers go and be killed anymore, but we sure are participating in an awful lot of death and destruction around the world. And so, you know, I guess I'm wondering, we're all involved in this, trying to try to stop wars and practice nonviolence, et cetera, and we don't seem to be having any success. At least some days I feel that way. I mean, I wonder what your look on that is.
Yeah. I mean, how could I not? How could we not? I mean, like you said, we've been doing this for over 50 years. You'd think by now we'd have made some progress. And I mean, I used to do a lot of work with, it used to be called IVAW, Iraq Vets Against the War. They changed their name now. But I mean, some of them were kind of, well, you know, you guys failed, and we're going to accomplish what you couldn't. So it's sad that we still have to do this after all these years, and it's frustrating. And certainly, I mean, I'm the coordinator of a chapter here in Long Island, a VFP, although we're kind of pretty much inactive now with the COVID thing. But we just continue on. I mean, you certainly have those moments when you wake up in the middle of the night, and I do, and look at the ceiling and say, well, what the hell am I wasting my time for? You have these idiots, and you have these politicians who, I mean, right now, I mean, they're debating now. Biden is going to decide whether or not to withdraw those troops from Afghanistan. What is that? 2,500 troops. So I mean, why wouldn't you? I mean, I know there's going to be repercussions if you do. I'm sure there's going to be some sort of issues if you take. But first of all, I'm not sure what all that positive stuff is that those 2,500 people do there. But maybe they do, and if we take them out, something's going to change. But if we keep them there for another year, another 2 years, what's going to be the difference? I mean, we've been there, what, 18 years? And what's going to happen in the next 2 years that's going to make it more a more opportune time to get the troops out then? Why not do it now? We could have got the troops out in '68 when McNamara realized that it wasn't winnable and the war was wrong. But yet he stayed. He kept his mouth shut. He went to work for the World Bank, and we continued to kill and to die. Why didn't we leave then? Well, why don't we leave now? because we're a warrior society. We're a militarist society. It's easy, as you know, to get ourselves involved in war, but not easy to extract ourselves once we're involved. No one wants to be the one who gives the order to retreat or to abandon the mission. How will they look at us? Will they think that we don't have the resolve to defend freedom in the world? Look, everyone knows who we are by now and what we do, and it's not about freedom, not about safety. It's whatever it is. It's not about that. So yeah, I get frustrated, and sometimes I say, you know what, I'm old. I'm 74 years old. Do I still want to get out there on these damn cold days and holding a sign and and yelling and screaming for peace? I do it less now. I spend more time writing, and I spend more time working with the kids and the students. And I think that's where my focus is going to be in my older years, because I think there is, you can see some maybe you can see an impact. Hopefully you can, if you touch one, and you don't touch many. I teach a course in war mythology, and actually one of the students, this was about probably 10 years after that class. I still teach it today, but this student was a student back about 10 years ago, and not very long ago, I get an email, and he says, Mac, everybody called me Mac, said, Mac, you probably don't remember me, but I was a student in your war mythology class. And I kind of didn't really remember him, but he says, I remember what we spoke about and how we talked and what we discussed. And after I graduated, I joined the Navy, but not only did he join the Navy, but he became a corpsman in the Marines. And when he was writing me, he was over in Iraq, and he was having issues, and he felt like there was no one there that he could talk to. And he wondered if he could talk with me. And I said, sure. And we talked. And it was sad. And I always feel like, what did I do wrong there? That after he graduated from school, you think, look, I don't want to try to convince someone, and I don't try to look, I try to present the facts and let them decide. But you hope that when they get to truth, because I don't do counter recruitment, I do truth in recruiting. And hopefully that when you understand the reality of military service, when you understand the reality of what the people in the military do, when you understand the reality of what war is, maybe you think twice before going. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And he went, and he wasn't really very happy what he was doing. And we talked about conscientious objection. But before I was able to talk to him about it, he had already gone to the chaplain. And of course, the first thing the chaplain says to him, well, how about if they were, running down your streets of your neighborhood, would you fight then? So he said, yeah, of course I would. Said, well, you can get conscientious objection, because we only give we recognize general conscientious objection, not specific conscientious. You have to be against all war, not against one specific war, in order to be recognized as a CO. So he wasn't able to do that. So finally, we talked about him going back to the Navy and getting out of his assignment as a corpsman to the Marines. And I wasn't sure if he was able to do that, but what he ended up doing was his unit, I forget what unit it was, a Marine unit, of course. It was had a stateside, headquarters stateside, and the forward units went over. So he was able to stay with the stateside element of his unit. And what ended up happening was that he would go as his troops. He regarded them as his troops, because it was his responsibility to keep them alive. So he was there with a board checking off names as they got onto the plane. And he was also there when the body bags and the coffins came back. So I mean, he saw his friends going and coming back dead, and there was all sorts of feelings of guilt that I should have been there because maybe I would have kept them alive. And so it wasn't a good thing. I actually spoke with his father a couple of times as well. And all of a sudden I stopped hearing from him, and I hope not for bad. I spoke to his father afterwards, trying to find out what happened to him, but he was okay. He was getting out. So you say to yourself, well, you can't even do that right. You can't even, I mean, that's what my activism is now. I can't go out there and physically stop the war, but maybe I can inform people not to be part of it, not to make the same mistake as I made. And I get parents all the time coming to me after I spoke someplace saying, my nephew or my niece is looking to join. Can you talk them out of it? No, you can't talk them out of it. I mean, no one could have talked to me and convinced me that I should become a lieutenant in the Marines. I mean, that was the thing. I wanted to do it. So you could have talked to you, until your head fell off. I wasn't going. So you can't do that. I said, what I can do is bring them to one of my talks or something where we can talk about the reality and the truth, and hopefully they can look. I was standing in front of a Marine Corps recruiting station one time, holding up my sign, and this young kid must have been 17 years old, and his mother was coming, and they were going to go into the recruiter. So I stopped them, and I very politely asked if I could talk to you for a moment, and he wasn't crazy about the idea of me talking to him, but the mother was okay with it. And she said, yeah, sure. So I said, well, are you going in thinking about to join the Marines? So he said, yeah, immediately. But she said, well, we're thinking about it. So I spoke to him. I said, look, explain to me, what is it about the Marine Corps that you want to be part of? Why do you want to join the Marines? So it was a warm summer day, so I had a short sleeve shirt on, and I have a Marine tattoo on my arm with Vietnam and all that baloney. So he happened to see that, and he looked at it, and he pointed to it, and he says, that's why I'm joining the Marines. I want to get a tattoo like that chicks really dig. Now, here's a 17-year-old kid who's making a commitment like that to the military, and we were in the middle of Iraq and Afghanistan then. So odds are, if he was joining the Marines, he was going over. He wasn't going to be in the band like they were going to promise him to be in. So with the idea that his motivation to joining the military was because he wanted to get a tattoo to impress women or girls. I mean, it's amazing. It's clearly an uninformed public that we have. And I think it's by design. I don't think that's just, ignorant people. I think we condition people, and we bring that up, and we try to create that environment where we think, the whole video game thing is based on that. I'm rambling on and on here. So
Camilo, I'm going to jump in here because one of the things we try to do, we march in parades, and I'm looking at your poem March of Folly, and you talk about marching in parades, and doesn't really amount to much, but we do it, and we put messages, of the budget and how do you foster peace and so on. And it is always coming up in my mind is, how do we effectively raise awareness? And we talk about individuals like you yourself talking to this young person, and I'm thinking, and we often talk to our congressional delegation about, things that they should be looking into. Do you have any ideas about what is the way to raise awareness? Folly, how money we spend and how we're wasting it. We're putting it in something active like working on how to cope with climate change. So if you have any ideas there, and if you think about that poem you wrote, March of Folly, it might inform us.
Yeah. Well, I wish I had the answer for you, but I don't. I'm as perplexed as you are. And that's often something that you hear. He said, well, you talk against. Well, what do you have to resolve the issue? I said, look, it's not for 1 or 2 or 3 individuals to figure this out. I mean, we have to just have the resolve to try and realize that war is not the answer, and the military is not the answer. And you know, it's like the old thing that when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when all we have is the idea of conflict and war, every situation that arises, we think that the solution is to go blow them up. Unfortunately, we have to start thinking out of the box. We have to start looking at other things. We have between the Long Island chapter and the New York chapter is very motivated about marching in the Manhattan Parade, which is a pretty big deal. And a couple of our members would go and march with them because I was never an advocate for that, so I didn't push it, and I of course left it up for anyone. We have a local parade too, but we never participated in it as a group because I just don't think it. But the argument, I can understand the argument that, you know, it's a way of getting out there and bringing awareness to some people, and especially now after all these years, they have given. First, they didn't let us in the parade. I mean, if you wanted to be in a parade, they wouldn't let you go. And then they would put you toward the back, and then they put you after the horses, where all the horse crap would get, you know, as you were walking. So I mean, they would make sure that they made it as uncomfortable as possible for VFP and others. I mean, some and the city chapter, New York City chapter, believes that a lot of good comes out of it. Again, I don't have the answers. I wish I did. Maybe war would be over if some of us had the answers. But you know, talking about where do we go from here and what do we do? And I once gave a talk, and it was a rave to the grave. And I think that's where I am. Yeah, I get frustrated. And do I think in my lifetime, are we going to see any significant change? Probably not. But that's not what I'm about. I'm about, at this point, to continue struggle. And I'm going to rave to the grave and hope that it's something that we can say, some example of our lives that we give may impress. And again, that's why I think teaching is such an important thing. And I'm 74 years old. I have to commute into Manhattan all the time, although now we're doing remote. But it's not easy. But I just feel like it's important that I have that, or I can, you know, influence.
Yeah, thank you for that. Good to hear some of this resolve. Sometimes you get sort of frustrated and wonder what it's all worth, you know, because it doesn't seem to be falling on where something gets. Somebody was trying to get a question.
Yeah, can I ask this, Bud? Can I ask about the poem, "The Rose"? You know, I started the book from beginning to end, and I guess I wanted to stop after I read the Rose. I just really liked that poem, and so I'm curious, you know, how real was that? Was there a rose? When did you write that? And is there a story?
Well, I mean, no specific story, but it was outside Hawaii. Not long after the 68 Tet Offensive. I mean, Hue was completely. Hue was anyone get up north there? I mean, Hue was the imperial city, and it was a very beautiful city at one point. I never saw it in its beauty. I saw it in its devastation because I was there in '69. It was already gone. But it was. I mean, it was just at that point. When I got over, I was a gung-ho, motivated Marine officer, but it didn't take me long to realize the futility and the insanity of all this, and it was a sad awakening for me, because being a Marine and being a Marine officer was something I wanted to do since the time I was 3 years old. So when I realized what it was truly about and what I truly had become, it was very frustrating. So I lost any sort of motivation and any sort of of pride in what I was doing. And I realized that the environment I was living in wasn't one where we talk of beauty and we talk about hope. And I mean, it's just about suffering and death. That's what we have. So the flower, I'm not sure if it was a rose now, it's been so many years, but it was something that was red and was a flower of some kind. But I didn't think I belonged there. It was out of place. It was a contradiction. So
Yeah. Yeah.
When you were talking about the student you had, and I teach as well, so I agree that it's probably one of the better weapons we have is to open up some minds that way. But when you were talking about the chaplain's response to conscientious objection, I remember that same one very well, and it was. But it brings up a question I get a lot about just war. And there's a Catholic doctrine on just war that's been evolving over time. But is there, I mean, how do you answer that when some people feel is a just war? You know, it's just none of these are. You know, World War II was, but these aren't.
I'm not even sure World War II was, but
Yeah.
Right.
about maybe 10, 15 years ago, I got a letter from Siena College, which is up past Albany. I think it's a little Franciscan college, but they do a big deal. They were a big deal in World War II. So it was some anniversary of World War II. So they were going to have this big conference on World War II, and they invited me to present a paper at the conference. So, you know, it was kind of halfway up to my house in the Adirondack. So I thought it was a good idea. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I said, well, send us an abstract of what you want to talk about. So I did. So I thought, just for fun, I was going to argue that World War II was not a just war. So I wrote the abstract and told that I'm going to argue that World War II is not a just war. So about a couple of days later, I get a letter saying, well, second thought, maybe you wouldn't be, right fit here. And so they pulled. And the reason why I was going to argue that was because of just war theory. If you know about just war theory, I'm sure some of them, maybe most of you do, it has two sets of criteria that have to be satisfied. And those criteria are not either or, not disjunctive, we say in philosophy, but conjunctive, the and. Both A and B, both have to be satisfied in order for a war to be just. Now, maybe World War II satisfied what was called the jus ad bellum criteria, the reason for starting the war. Maybe there was just cause for starting the war, but that's not all that's required in order for a war to be just. You have to have just cause for starting a war, but you also have to conduct yourself within the war justly. And one of the main criteria to satisfy that is that you don't target and kill civilians. So clearly in World War II, we did. I mean, we even called it by the correct name. We called it terror bombing the cities. So we were definitely targeting and killing non-combatants, which is a violation of that second set of criteria about a just war. So I was going to argue that since it's conjunctive, both sets have to be satisfied. And World War II satisfied one, but not the other. It wasn't a just war. And I think that works. I truly think philosophically that works. What just war theory is interesting. It goes back, as you said, it goes back to Aquinas and Augustine and even before, because I mean, the Socrates and Plato and the Spartans talked about justice in the war as well. Some worry that having the possibility of war being okay makes war inevitable. And as a philosopher, I have to entertain the possibility, at least theoretically, that war can be just. Because in philosophy, somebody's always going to come up with, well, what happens if the Martians land? And they're always going to come up with some wild hypothetical, and if you're going to say, well, war is never, I'm not an absolute pacifist. I allow the theoretical possibility, at least, that war can be just. And if you ask me, what students often do, give me an example of a just war, at least a modern war, I can't come up with one. So theoretically, maybe just war is possible. Certainly, World War II probably came as close to what a just war could be, as we have certainly after World War II, not even close.
Yeah,
Did I
that's,
go off on a tangent on that, Marty?
no, that's come up
Oh.
in, it comes up in a class I teach where we, it's military literature and all the students are special operators. So it's kind of fun to be undercover in that.
Wow.
But we do
Where do you
Slaughterhouse Five. So in Slaughterhouse Five, the whole issue of that second piece of Just War comes up with the bombing of Dresden.
Right.
And it's an incredible discussion that I end up having with them about that.
I would imagine. Where do you teach? What's the name of the school?
It's at Norwich University. It's I teach an online class there.
Is it a military school?
Norwich is. It was actually where ROTC started.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But it's, you know, it's a gig to keep me going at 72. So,
Yeah.
but I find it's really fascinating to be able to bring these kinds of ideas and I guess what you say, little truths to people who are the furthest from what you would expect to even be open to any of this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes it's good to go into the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
And I gave a couple of talks at the Merchant Marine Academy here
Mhm.
in Queens, and that's not really a military school. I mean, Merchant Marine Academy, you can be in the military, but you can go and work for Disney or something, you know, on one of their ships. So but there was military types in the group that I spoke with, and I mean, they weren't antagonistic. They didn't like what I had to say, but they were willing to listen, and I think that's good. And
Mhm.
maybe, you know, you always say that, well, you said a lot, and 90% maybe they just, you know, threw away, but maybe there's 10% that makes them think a little bit. And maybe 10 years from now, they look back and say, what that anal philosopher was talking about, maybe it meant something, you know. So you hope. Oh, what else do we have?
How do you feel about this? There's some people, and I forget the protagonist, the main guy who proposed this, but I forget his name, but of nonviolent armies, that if you had to defend yourself, or you had to have a war, that if you had an army that was not armed at all, that would take a lot more bravery than it takes to, you know, I mean, you always hear this thing about people. I was never in a shooting war, but you know, they always say that 9 out of 10 people in the shooting war, you know, shoot up into the sky, right? They never really shoot to kill.
Yeah,
Um,
at least 17 out of 20, 17 out of 100 rather. SLA Marshall did that study about that and found that only 17 out of 100 actually fired their weapon at the enemy. The other
yeah.
shot. But the military did what they needed to do. I mean, they modified boot camp and basic training to make it so sophisticated, psychologically, emotionally, and morally, in order to effectively create individuals to kill. They did the study. That was after World War II, by the way. They did the study again after the Korean War. SLA Marshall did. He was a general in the Army, also the Army historian. And he found after the Korean War that now, after making after modifying basic training in boot camp and making it more a conditioning experience, almost like Pavlov's dogs, you know, condition you, you know, aim and shoot, aim and kill, aim and kill. That I think it was like 54 out of 100 were shooting their weapons at the enemy. And after Korean War, that wasn't good enough, so they made it even more. I mean, a brainwashing adventure. And after the Vietnam War, it was up to in the 90s. And I haven't seen a study on the current wars, but I have no reason to believe that our people are any less lethal than they were back then. But nonviolence, certainly Gandhi, I mean, achieved great victory through nonviolence, and people asked him too. I said, you know, they tell him, look, yeah, worked against the gentleman English nonviolence, but it wouldn't have worked against Hitler. But the fact of the matter is, nonviolence did work against Hitler. And I think it was one of the Scandinavian countries, I forget which, was occupied by the Nazis, and the people got together and did all this direct action of strikes, and this made it so difficult for the Nazis to stay in charge, if you will. And eventually thought it wasn't in their interest to stay, and they backed up and they left. So nonviolence, can work, I think. And Gandhi used to say that if we spent as much time preparing for nonviolent resistance as we do for violent resistance, we'd probably be a lot better off. But certainly Gandhi considered what he did as a war. He didn't consider himself laid back doing nothing. He was out there engaged, and people were getting hurt, but his own people were getting hurt. He didn't want his people to hurt anyone else.
So we're approaching about 8 o'clock, and I'm wondering about the timing, and we haven't heard from a few other people. I'm not sure when you have to leave, Camilla.
I'm okay if you want to stay a little longer.
We can go for a little longer. So other questions.
What do you normally stay when you do these things?
Well, we set it up for an hour, thinking that would be good, and then we heard you come on, so it's a little open. If you're okay with that.
Sure. Why don't we just, go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to know if you would be willing to give me permission to publish some of your poems on our front porch forum around various holidays and so forth, which are appropriate for the words that you have written. And I would really like to have that permission, but that's up to you.
Sure you can.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and matter of fact, contact me. I this past Christmas, I wrote, it's not a poem per se, but it's a short story about the Christmas, a casualty of war, and I think that may be relevant as well for you if you talk about holidays and stuff.
The other thing I'd like to say too is I thank you very much for doing all the writing you've been doing, because these poems are ones that I can fully understand, having been in Vietnam for 1 year. And I was never in action per se because I was aboard a hospital ship, but I certainly saw the results of what was happening there and observed, and we almost lost the hospital ship because we were anchored out on Chu Lai, and the folks got in there and they upset the place where they had all the bombs and all the munitions, and the bloody thing went up in quite an explosion, which made us get underway immediately.
Yeah. I hope that I mean, I've heard it both ways. I've heard from many veterans who share similar, had similar experiences and share similar outlook on it. And I've heard from others who say that I'm just a traitor and crazy. And but that's the way you can't you just have to say it, and hope that nobody blows your head away one day when you're walking down the street.
I have two thoughts, Mac. One is my first thought as I read through the book was that this should be required reading in every high school. How's that for?
Well, I used to do a lot of schools back in the day, but back before No Child Left Behind in the Bush administration, the local schools around here got to know us, me, and a couple of others of VFP people and VVAW people, and whenever they had well, we had a couple of peace nicks within school, so whenever they had a recruiter in, which was often, they would invite us to come and talk. So we got to know each other very well. But then after No Child Left Behind came, and the schools, the administration for the schools were concerned that by having us in there, they were threatening their financial whatever they got from from the government. We stopped getting, but I still do schools, and the vast majority of the times that I go to schools, it's to talk about Tim O'Brien's Things They Carry. That's a very popular book on high schools and colleges. I use it in one of my classes as well. I just did a local high school here a couple of days ago, and they were doing, and I've been doing it for many years. The teacher is a good friend of mine now, and she does Things They Carried every year, and so that's one way. It's one in. I mean, you try to get into these schools if you can. It's not as easy as it used to be, but I would be happy if they would, use some of my work in there too. But whatever, I'm content with them using Things They Carried. I think Things They Carried is the second best war book ever written, and the first is All Quiet on the Western Front. I think Remark and O'Brien, two excellent authors. And the funny thing is, they're both novels. And how else can you make people better on this feel? And that's what O'Brien does. He tries to make you feel the experience, not just to intellectualize it. And I think he's successful as much as he can be with people who never had the unfortunate experience of being there. What was the second thing you wanted to see, Dave?
Well, my second fantasy, as I read through this, didn't come till just recently, and we have a civilian non-war member, Dennis Mueller, and he did the film on Howard Zinn, and he collaborates with professor at UVM and so on. They do movies. They did one about the resistors, and actually showed it before the Canadian, they call it Parliament, in order to encourage the Parliament to stop the Prime Minister from sending them back to the US. That was my fantasy. Gee, we have a 74-year-old aspiring actor on our hands. If each one of these,
You're not talking about me, are you?
oh, of course.
Oh, acting is not something.
Oh, of course. You don't want Ronald Reagan to have all every one of these stories and every one of these poems becomes a movie in itself. And of course, when the kids are young, particularly, they're more voyeurs than anything else, and certainly thinkers. It might even satisfy Augustine to find a way to satisfy the emperor, to say, well, I didn't really condemn war, but you find a way to do it, and then I'll agree with you. But each one of these little pericopes is a burst of truth, is what I see, that the kids otherwise are not getting. They're skirting all around the truth in every other subject very, very often. And they're at the age where the voyeur, what they see is more attractive, especially if she has good shape and so on, than what they read. And of course, people are different. But if there were a movie or a set of movies that had these, what we used to call them, selected short subjects in between the movie, and something like that could create a powerful burst. Everybody loves chrysanthemum on the 4th of July. Well, this would be like an ongoing chrysanthemum to lift up these poems and the prose, and then show it. I bet the kids would demand that it be shown in the in the schools?
Well, let me see, about 4 years ago, I was contacted by a couple of filmmakers who were wanting to make this film. I mean, even from the beginning, I knew it was bad because the title was "Thank You for Your Service," but it wasn't, and I was promised that it wasn't about that. It was about the true experience of war, and there was a number of Carl Melantis and others were involved in it. So I thought it was pretty worth my time to get involved with. So they actually came to my school on 3 different occasions, and we sat down and we talked. We must have talked for about, well, 2 hours once, 3. I must talk about 6, 7 hours, and that they filmed. And it was just me being interviewed and talking about whatever the interviewer wanted to talk about. And I mentioned to the guy, I said, I don't really know much about this, but I know that a lot of this stuff ends up on the cutting room floor. And I hope that after spending 7 hours, and you're not paid for these things, you do them because you think you're contributing something positive to humankind. After I said, well, I hope some of it makes it through. Anyway, when the final cut came out and they made a big deal about the premiere, and I was invited to the premiere, and Phil Donahue was the host, and it was like a pretty big deal. So we sat down and we watched it, and my wife said, well, when do you come on? When do you come on? So there was like 2 seconds when I came on and said something that, probably completely out of context and stupid. And that's what they, but I realized they had Giuliani in there, and don't ask me why. Giuliani had about 10 times longer time to talk than I did in the film. And I realized after, and I actually told the filmmaker when I spoke to him, that you sold us out, because I know why you did this, because you had to go to a specific, you had to go in a certain direction in order to maintain your funding. And you couldn't be as radical as you thought you were, or as you tried to convince me you were going to be.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he really had the intentions to tell it like it is, or he was just bullshitting me, to try and get me to. But so that was my experience with filmmaking, but you try.
Talk to Dennis Mueller.
Yeah.
We can introduce you if you're interested.
Well, let's see what happens, what he wants to do, and you have my contact information. So if he wants to do something, let him contact me or contact Patrice.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate your another bad experience.
Anyway, we talked out.
I don't know, other questions who hasn't spoken yet? Jeffrey, you've been quiet. Have you got anything to ask? Reg, your hand is up.
2 things. I want to know if you really did step out on a flower in the war zone.
Yeah, it wasn't a rosebud. I lied about the rose.
The other thing is, as you were talking about recruitment and going into high schools, Addison County Peace Coalition, which is the county we live in here in Middlebury, had a program back a few years ago where we set up a booth at Field Days. Now, Field Days is a local county fair that has about 50,000 people attend it.
Wow.
And we had, in 4 days, probably at least 20,000 people come by. And I think it was 4 people among the panel here now that were there. I think Gordon was there, and Dave Branson was there, and myself, and I'm not certain if anybody else was there or not.
Louise was there.
I know Dave Branson was there, and we had a confrontation with the recruiter from the Army, and another one from the National Guard that had a booth on the other side of the same place we were displaying, and we back and forth, many different times. We had some negative ones and some positive ones, and it ended up we walked away friends, but.
Yeah, it always ends up that way, I think. We have this in Long Island here. We have this the celebration of the instruments of war. Every Memorial Day, they have this massive air show at the local Jones Beach area here. I mean, it's just, they have the Blue Angels, and they have, I mean, all these famous, and it's like actually tens of thousands of people come to this, and it's on Memorial Day weekend, and we've been fighting for years. We don't like the idea at all, but why have it on Memorial Day weekend? Have it on Flag Day or some other day. Why Memorial Day weekend? So we go, and we try to make people understand that this is not about the celebration of the instruments of death and destruction. It's about remembering those who were sacrificed for nothing, really. But the same sort of thing happens. We were never allowed to have a booth. They would never grant us a booth, but we just stood there anyway. And there were plenty of recruiters who had these massive tents on the beach, and they had all sorts of robotic things that they had for the kids to play with, and all sorts of drones, and all wonderful, giving away T-shirts and hats and dog tags and all sorts of wonderful things to entice these kids in. And we would get into some discussion with them. It was never antagonistic, And matter of fact, some of them were sympathetic to who we were and what we were trying to do, because we tried to make it as though, we're not here to be anti-war. We're here to be pro-veteran and pro-warrior. It's about trying to remember properly and to end the exploitation, because many of these kids who go to Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, they realize that they're being exploited. They see the insanity and the futility of it all, and they realize it too.
Another thing that happened, probably, I'd say 12 or 14 years ago, maybe more than that even. We went into a little town of Morrisville and had a parade. I think it was on the 4th of July, but I'm not certain what day it was now. But I think Dave Ransom probably remembers this. And they had a National Guard unit that had just returned from Iraq. And I think they had lost 4 or 5 members of that crew over in Iraq had died. And we show up with Veterans for Peace with all our peace flags and so on. And we were going to be in the parade up there. We've been accepted in the parade, all right. But they were very cold shouldered to us all the way to the presentation. And as we marched down the main street, we got in front of the reviewing stand, and the announcer at the reviewing stand turned the whole show around for us. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, these guys have been there, they've seen that, they've done that, and they say they want peace." And I agree with him. And the crowd erupted with applause.
Wow.
And the rest of the parade was uphill, but it was easy going.
that was great. That was certainly a courageous announcer you had there.
Yeah.
To take a stand like that.
He did a wonderful job for us as far as that was concerned.
Yeah.
Another time we were marching in Northfield in the Norwich parade, and we had 1,100 cadets leading us down and we're right behind the cadets as we're coming down the main street. We got down almost to the reviewing stand, and all of a sudden, in the crowd, not having anything to do with us, a guy stood up and started playing taps. The whole crowd just went numb. And everybody stood up and they were standing. And he made a mistake. He got almost to the end. So he went back and he played it all the way through the second time. By the end of the second time, you could hear a pin drop. And there was like 10,000 people there.
Wow.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
We tried to find that guy. We never did find him. It was an amazing situation. So there are some positive things that can come out of parades.
Yeah, clearly.
So other questions, Jeffrey, did you have your hand up or did you want to say anything? You're muted.
Sorry, Richard. No, I read the preface. I couldn't get the book, but very glad that you held this tonight. This is great.
Good.
It really is.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, well, Richard got us into this.
Well, it was Marty, actually.
Okay, but it's
Yeah, I
great.
put out some of the information on it, but so glad you could join us.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, I'm sorry, I missed the other day because I didn't get up. So sorry about that. But anyways, I relate to what the speaker's talking about Way. I've been to Way and I think it's a wonderful city. I really enjoy it a lot.
you've been there now recently?
I taught school English as a second language there during the winter. I think
Oh,
in
wow, great. How is it?
2012.
Is the Citadel rebuilt?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a national monument now.
Wow.
But just the one thing I wanted to share is that I've sponsored a school over there, and I'm involved with a group that does demining work, and we built a school up. I served a place called the Rock Pile, which was a little
Right.
north away during the
Yeah.
Tet. So I got a school up there, and I just got an email the other day with all these little children singing me a song for the new year for the Tet. And I
Wow,
thought,
how nice.
yeah, it
Yeah,
really
yeah.
brought me joy. So
Yeah.
just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of vets. That person I mentioned before, Susan Schnall, she works. She's constantly over there. She does with the Agent Orange thing, and
Yeah.
they build hospitals and stuff. And she does a lot of work with them. And she's always getting these kind of things too, which is so gratifying to watch.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. So thank you for sharing your work with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to do it.
Mac, this was just absolutely beautiful. Several years ago, we had 2 or 3 years in a row with a teacher who was in favor with us up in Missisquoi, which is about as far north as you can go to high school in Vermont. And she had a veterans in representing all the veteran services and organizations you could think of. So she included us, and she was a very peace leaning person herself, and set us up at tables so that you'd have a couple of veterans or a veteran, and then opposite them would be 2 students. And they would be formed in a circle so that the students would have so many minutes with each table and then move on, and they would write papers and such. And that was found to be a really helpful thing for the student faculty, for the whole school. The principal wasn't too hot about it initially, but after the first year, he became much more interested. And I was wondering, and the book that she had assigned them were the things they carry.
Mm.
They were each of her, I think it was 7 different class levels that she dealt with, and they each had different responses.
Bless you.
The question that came to my mind too was, how can we invade the schools with your book? And I was thinking this would make an even more poignant read for a student class. Have you had any experience with that?
I have that one school that I just redid again a couple of days ago. They a number of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 now, and they bought about 60 of my books that we're giving away to one whole grade level. But I never actually heard anything about that anymore. And I never actually went there to talk about my book. I always went there to talk about things they carried, which is perfectly fine with me. I think things they carried is good because it's, maybe I'm just too confrontational and in my writing, and I don't know if it's maybe going to turn off a lot of people in the schools and people who aren't necessarily as sympathetic to peace as we are. So it's probably not a chance that many, especially in this time, that school administrators want to take unless they're very courageous to bring someone in as considered as radical as I am. And I'm not sure I'm all that radical, but they certainly think I am, and maybe I am by my writing. So I, you know, I would love to do it, and I would love to have them. I teach at the School of Visual Arts. It's an art college in Manhattan, and we're one of the highest rated veteran friendly colleges in the country. And a couple of years ago, the veteran group actually read this, and we had a similar event, but it was in person at the time. And I found that it was a kind of a hostile crowd. The new veterans, as they call themselves, are, you know, and they're volunteers, and they take pride in their being volunteers. They weren't conscripts like we were, and drug addicts and draft dodgers. And so I used to be heavily involved with them, but then over time, I wasn't invited to their meetings any longer. And I think they just went in the other direction. If nothing else, they decided that they wanted to put the war behind them, and they didn't want to talk about it anymore. And they just wanted to concentrate on getting their degree and moving on. And I can accept that, and I can understand that. So
The other thought that comes to me too, Mac, is Carl, who you see there, and Richard have been phenomenal in writing letters at different topics at different times to our political leaders. And I was thinking that your book itself, since we have actually had the ear of each of them at different times, would be a good presentation to challenge them with. And I'm sure their first line people would be the first ones to read it. But it might be, I don't know what Richard and the others think about it, but it might be that some of those at least first line people would actually read the book and start to see, as we do, the truth in it, rather than all the crap that they have to deal with during the day. It might be a refreshing experience for them, and maybe eventually make its way to the actual Congress people.
Yeah, people who make the decisions, huh?
So we're approaching 8:30 now, and I'm wondering if there are any other pressing questions or things we want to ask Camillo.
I have one, but it's personal.
Well, you can stay on the line.
Yeah.
Stay on the
You
line.
grew up in Brooklyn. I have cousins there. Did you happen to know Carol Megna, Josie Megna? 24. They're on 23rd Street
And where?
in Brooklyn.
What part? You know, Brooklyn has
It's 2554 East 23rd Street. And I think they went to Brooklyn Heights High School.
Oh, well, that's a nice area, Brooklyn Heights. Now I was in Canarsie, which is
Okay.
which is away. Pretty famous. W.C. Fields used to always talk about Canarsie in his skits. But
Just a lot of the things you were talking about reminded me of them, you know, and the Italian grandmothers and all of that. So.
Well, so thank you so much, Camillo, for spending this time with us. It's been really interesting, and really appreciate your taking the time. And maybe somehow we can keep in touch and
I hope so.
some of the things that have come up here in the meeting.
That's great. I'm always available. You know how to contact me. So, and if I can certainly do it, I will do it.
And Marty, thank you so much for bringing him to our attention, and we'll maybe read some more of your books and keep at it. So
Well,
I-
thank
you've
you.
given us some encouragement, I think, at least for me, I feel a little more encouraged. Sometimes you can get pretty down on the fact that, geez, this isn't amounting to a hill of beans. So
Yeah,
thank you
I think
for-
I sent Marty the other 2 copies of my other 2 books too, so
Yeah.
maybe he can pass them around too and see if you find anything
Right.
interesting there as well. So
All right. So
thank you
you
for
very
inviting me
much.
again. It's been
And,
a pleasure talking to all of you.
and you have the recording, so,
Oh,
use
yeah.
it as you want. And I don't know if we can get a copy of that if we want.
I will try to figure out how to send it to you.
Yeah.
I think I know from my classes, they normally, you get an email with a copy of the recording in it. So, but that's on the school Zoom site. I don't know how it is now on this particular one.
I
But
understand that some of the audio, the video Zooms have so much space that it overloads the computer, so it may not be possible, but maybe the audio would come through. I'm not
oh,
sure.
I get you. I get you. You
So we'll
can't.
have to see about that.
I will try, but
We'll explore that later. So thank you again, and thanks so much.
have a great night, everyone.
Yep, you too.
Bye bye.